Welcome back, everyone. We are resuming the discussion that I'm having with my guest, Rosemarie Rajwant, an educator and a politician from the great nation of Grenada.
Thank you for having me once again, Cesare. As an educator, I feel that in order for citizens to make good political choices, they need to have a certain level of education. So in order to build a healthy democracy, it really is important to ensure that the education system is meeting the needs of all citizens, just so that they're able to critically assess their candidates and choose wisely.
Indeed. I just want to put all of this again in context. Rosemarie and I, we're here to discuss some ideas and issues that we each care about. And maybe we succeed in coming to an agreement or maybe not, but it's not just up to us. There are people out there watching, listening, thinking, and judging what makes the most sense. So all of you viewers, if what either of us is saying resonates with you, please go ahead and support our ideas in the Agora, in your ideological profile. We all share in the power here. Okay, round two. This is my idea. Now, this is a longer idea, and I'm thinking about whether I should read it all at once or in sections. Let's see how it goes. Now, this is a very contentious topic. It's about abortion. So if you have a comment that you want to make at the end of the paragraph, let me know, or I'll just continue to the end. Here we go. Abortion of a pregnancy is the right of the pregnancy carrier until the time when the developing organism is reasonably deemed a person, at which point the organism becomes protected as a member of the human society. One exception to this is when the pregnancy endangers the life or critical health of the pregnancy carrier, in which case the pregnancy may be ended at a later time, at the discretion of the pregnancy carrier. Another exception to this is when the child will be born with medical conditions that significantly adversely affect the child's quality of life, in which case the pregnancy may be ended at a later time, at the discretion of the parents. So that's the end of the paragraph.
So my first question would be, the phrase when the developing organism is deemed to be a person, something to that effect. Like, do you think this should be universal, or would it be okay if it varied from country to country, or like who should decide at what point this is a person? Like, do you think it should be a standard across the world, or should the parents decide? Like, how would you go about determining what that cutoff point is?
You know, you're right. Actually, I should have just kept read the idea in full. It really makes so much more sense to read in full because the next part addresses that as well as one other thing. So the determination of personhood of the developing organism is conceptual and speculative, but it can be approximated by the organism's neurological complexity and consequently the ability to generate subjective experience. This task is best achieved through a philosophical and scientific consensus. The next clause is the determination of medical conditions that significantly adversely affect the child's quality of life is subjective and relative, and it should be decided through a democratic consensus.
Right. So in the second paragraph, you're pretty much saying that that point where you determine that this is now a person, it should be done through scientific means. But my question still stands, like, should the scientific community come together and formally establish a point during a pregnancy where a fetus, the developing organism, is a person? Or like, how do you think that should be decided on? Should it be one meeting and then there's a decision that would be the standard for the entire world, or do you think it should be the scientific community in every country, or how would that decision be made?
You know, I'm glad you bring that up. That is one of the essential points of this, and but one of the essential points is to say uh, that the determination of the personhood of the developing organism is conceptual and speculative, which means
Mm-hmm.
we whatever we say it is, we
Mm-hmm.
can't with any certainty. Like, how can you with any certainty say that, you know, Iraq does not have consciousness or something? How can you with any certainty say that another human being actually has consciousness? I mean,
Yeah.
you really speculate that they do because the way that people act, the things that they say. But how do you know that they're not, let's say, a clone or a cyborg or something, or whatever? Like maybe they were born without a soul. I'm saying this in a comedic way, but how do you know that they really are a person? Like there's no way that you can test that they have
Right.
a personal
Yeah.
subjective experience, and that's what we're
Right.
saying is that it's conceptual and
Then,
speculative, and
right.
we're just trying to make a good judgment about it. Go ahead, please.
Right. So then I think if we agree that it's conceptual, then we agree that it would vary from person to person or from group to group. And so if we're letting, like, let's say we're not having like a law on it, or like a national policy or a global policy, then are we leaving it up to individuals to decide?
Well,
Because
well,
at that point I
we
would.
are, just to correct you, I mean, yes, I think this is about making laws. So yes, we are trying to make laws at a national level, right?
Okay. So then if there's going to be a law, then we're gonna say that there's gonna be some period of time where there's research, or the scientific community is gonna put their heads together, and it will be determined that this is the point at which the organism is a person. Like, we're not gonna leave it, it's not gonna be decided after that. Like, the decision's gonna be made, and then the knowledge will be out there. So it's not gonna be a case by case basis where the potential parents get to decide after that point, because the
Well,
scientific community would have established what the point is at which the organism is a person.
well, and so this is kind of like a tricky statement, you know, because it says philosophical and scientific consensus. And so who are the philosophers here that are playing into the equation? And frankly, I think, and especially with Igora, everyone is a philosopher, you know. So, um, well, anyone who uses it, but everyone is involved in some aspect. Every person who has language, they, you know, they have these philosophical ideas. And so we're saying that it's not just about science, because even scientists, they have to play philosophers, you know? It's they're not just getting to be scientists, they also have to be philosophical about it. I think one of the things that I was kind of unclear with what you were saying, uh, we're not saying that, well, okay, I certainly don't think that we should make a judgment and never revisit it again. That the judgment could be revisited, but it wouldn't be revisited for every situation. You know, like we make a law of based on whatever. I mean, essentially, it would have to be a democratic, some kind of a vote or some kind of a decision. We see how well that works for a certain amount of time until we feel the need to revisit the issue. Um, but it wouldn't be like every, you know, in every instance we hold a new vote, you know. Obviously, we have to try to standardize things, right?
Mhm. And then my next question would be on the last statement where you say that it should be established by democratic means.
So let me read this
What
section. This
do
is one.
you mean? Yeah.
uh, the the determination of medical conditions that significantly adversely affect the child's quality of life is subjective and relative, and it should be decided through a democratic consensus.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
what it's saying is that as a society, we should figure out what are the things that we think would make life terrible.
Oh.
That we that it would be better to not be born than uh, It would be better to not be born at all than to have to suffer through these conditions. Because, you know, some people could say that being born like a, a handicap, like quadriplegic, or you know, born without any arms or legs, could be a crippling defect. That, you know, but that's not true, because so many people who are born in such conditions live, uh, you know, live rich and satisfying lives. But then again, I don't know, and maybe we should listen to more of these people, what people like that born with these conditions have to say about their life experiences and how that pertains. But then again, you know, because we could look at the same thing with ugly people, or we could look at the same thing with blue-eyed or brown-eyed people. You know, like, what are these? Maybe one of these conditions are just make, you know, we should say that, hey, if you're born, if your child is going to be born with a certain color eyes, you know, it's okay. You can put them out of their misery, you know. So, but I mean that in a humorous way, right? You know, but
Song like Hitler.
no, well, no, but the point is because this is complicated. Like, because
Yeah.
here's the thing. This is because that clause pertains to this clause. Another exception to this, when the parents should be able to abort their child. Another exception to this is when the child will be born with medical conditions that significantly adversely affect the child's quality of life, in which case the pregnancy may be ended at a later time at the discretion of the parents. So if the parents find that their child is going to be miserable, if they think that the child is going to be miserable and they don't want to have the child, then they can, even after the child is considered a person, then they can abort their child. That's what that.
I hear you. I'd like to add though, what about society providing orphanages for those situations? Like, let's say the parents decide that we don't have the resources to care for this child who will require more attention.
No, no,
That
that's not the issue. No, let's not make it about the resources. As a society, if we're gonna force somebody to bring this child into this world, then we better be providing the resources to care for that
right,
person. So
right.
no, it's not about
Um,
resources.
Right, but so what, yeah, what if the parents, let's say they do have the resources, but they just don't want the responsibility, personally?
Exactly.
Uh, should there, because like I think in most countries there's a home for mentally retarded people. Um, so let's say a parent finds out late in the pregnancy that the child's gonna be born with some severe mental retardation, which in a lot of cases is tied to physical deformity too. Um, Already they're home, so I mean the parents could just have the child, put the child in that home, and the state takes care of those children, and they're specially trained people who, you know, they enjoy taking care of these children. So the children, I mean, they're alive, they, you know, they live in the homes, and there are groups that visit them, that interact with them. So they certainly survive, even if the families don't
But it's not
wish to
about survival.
raise them.
But
Sorry?
that but it's not just about survival. It's about whether that person is going to live a happy life. And the point of this idea is to say that the parents actually are making a compassionate decision in some aspect. Because
Right.
if the parents cannot love their own child due to that condition, how can they, why should they expect the world to accept that child? I think the point is to say that I think we need to recognize, by
Um,
giving that power to the parents, we should be
mhm.
recognizing our own responsibility. That, hey, if the parents don't want to care for that child, are we going to care for that child? Are we going to love that child for the parents? This
Um,
Part of this is to shift the responsibility on the people
right.
by
But
delegating that responsibility to the
isn't
parents.
isn't that what adoption is though? Like people who adopt normal, like, you know, healthy babies, let's say healthy. Isn't that what adoption is? Like people being willing to take care of a child like the parents would, just because the parents won't?
That's Right, but so many people don't get adopted. There are so many children who don't. And you know what I'm saying here with the end of this idea, when we're talking about a democratic consensus, is I'm saying that we should be having discussions about this with people who are affected, like directly affected by these situations, and we should be listening to these people. We should be listening to the parents who want to abort their children. For what are their arguments? Why do they think that they should
Mhm.
be able to do that? I want to hear them speak. I want to hear them uh, express, you know, say why can they not love their child, or why do they not want their child to be come into existence? And then second of all, we want to be hearing from children who have been abandoned by their parents, and we want to hear from people who are born with certain uh, these significant adverse conditions. I
Mhm.
think we should be discussing these people. If these people, because maybe I don't know what these people are going to say. Maybe they're going to say, "Hey, whatever. I was you know born with my arm on top of my head. Well, whatever. Life has still been great." And maybe it's a resounding yes from everybody. Or maybe they're like, "No, you know what? This is fucked up. Like, I mean, I made the most of my life, but maybe it's been really shitty living a life like this. It's been all adversity. And if I was never born, you know, if I never came into this world, it would have been better off. Because if that's what those people are saying, then shit, we should be listening to them, you know? And that's what I mean by
Oh,
democratic
yeah.
consensus, by giving those people a voice and actually paying attention, not just theorizing about this uh,
I
in a
think, I
vacuum.
think, yeah, I think giving people a voice is important, but if happiness is what decides, is what we use to decide whether or not a child would be born. Like, should you be born if you're not going to be happy? Then it goes beyond medical conditions because let's say it's a family living in poverty and they don't wish, like, let's say circumstances change suddenly and the baby is going to be born healthy, but for other reasons, any other reasons besides the child being potentially born with a medical defect, they decide that I'm not able to be a good parent anymore because of a sudden change in circumstances or whatever that would affect the child's happiness. um, would the person also, would the parent also have the right to decide that my child is not going to have a happy life, so I should terminate this pregnancy? And then, like, in a lot of cases, the decision isn't always mutual because sometimes one parent wants one thing and the other parent wants one thing. So that's another conflict that exists. And then as a society, we have to think about who has the right, should it be the female or should it be the male? To what extent the male should, as the biological father, should have the right to determine if an abortion is necessary, or should we always have a consensus? And then, I mean, it's a totally different conversation for
Well,
same-sex couples where one partner is not the biological parent.
you bring up an interesting point. There's actually a lot to unpack within this idea, you know, because what it's saying is especially when we're talking about the health of the pregnancy carrier, then
Mhm.
in this idea we're saying that it's the discretion of the pregnancy carrier. You know, it's not anyone else. But when we're talking about the you know medical conditions that significantly affect the child's quality of life, then we're saying it's at the discretion of the parents. And so, and that becomes complicated because that could happen in many, that could actually end up in many different ways. It's not just, you know, one vote man, one vote woman, or actually we're saying pregnancy carrier. So it could be
Yeah.
two men potentially, two women potentially, right?
Wait,
Uh,
sorry, how two men carry a pregnancy?
uh, Listen, science is taking us in some really strange places. That's why we're
Okay.
using these words of pregnancy carrier, right? So,
Wondering about.
right. That's why, right. So this is interesting. But so what we're saying is that okay, it's at the discretion of the parents. But so, and maybe there are three parents, you know, so that's another thing. But the point is, okay, well, the pregnancy carrier, maybe they want to end the pregnancy, but maybe the other person, you know,
Right.
who's maybe they're like, well, I still want this child. And then the pregnancy carrier says, well, if you want the child, you can keep the child. I'll deliver the child. But then you keep the child and I'm leaving and you stay with the child. So there are different ways that parents can
Yeah.
settle this. Or, yeah, so it can get complicated. That's why we didn't dig into that, because that's really the politics of, of
Yeah.
a family. Um,
Um, I'd like to say that, ideally, I would say that it's an individual's decision. I mean, um, from an ethical perspective, it's okay to advise persons not to have abortions, but to actually make it illegal, that's a bit of an infringement on people's rights. I would want to add, though, that any country that makes abortion illegal should really have in place good policies for adoption, like good orphanages or good programs to support parents who may not want to care for their children, like to encourage them to do so and to provide for them, if the national policy is going to be that abortion is illegal. Because I don't know. I would think that it can't be a decision that's made in isolation from other decisions. I mean, I know in Egora we support the UBI and a couple other things. So I'm just saying that for countries to have this law against abortion, except for certain circumstances, then other structures must be in place to ensure that people who are probably second guessing whether they want to be parents at some point in a pregnancy, they have support systems to help them to be good parents. Because I think, these people, should they be forced to become parents, then they'll become bad parents. And, they may endanger the child at another stage in life. Like we have lots of kids being abused. We have adults being abused or
right.
having to recover from traumatic childhood experiences.
Well, those are kind of separate. Abusing children is a separate legal matter. That's a whole other situation, and that can change. Maybe you're not abusing your child for the first few years, but then when they get older, you start abusing them. So it's not always
Mhm.
like you're an abuser the whole time. Just later on, for whatever reason, maybe something triggers. But actually, you're bringing up the main point, because of this idea. We kind of dug into the details, but the main point of this idea is to say it actually starts out being very, let's say, pro-abortion, but then it kind of becomes the opposite. Well, it's all like there's a lot of interpretation to this, because we're opening up with abortion of a pregnancy is the right of the pregnancy carrier until the time. So that's what we're saying. We're starting out with that's like that it's a positive, like we're reinforcing that until the time when the developing organism is reasonably deemed as a person. So that's why we're saying, like, when it's a person, that's when it becomes a legal matter. But then there's this huge kind of gray area, and like when
Mhm.
does that happen? And so
Right.
we're trying to determine that. Is that at the moment of conception, or is that at the moment of birth? Is that somewhere in the middle, or is it like 5 years after? Only when the child is like 6 years old or something that
Yeah.
it's really
And yeah. And then even for persons who have already been born, I mean, I would argue that there are different levels of personhood, because what about people who are mentally retarded? I don't think you can ask them certain questions and expect a sound response. Like if we wanna ask a 5-year-old mentally retarded child, like, are you happy with your condition? Would you have preferred not to be born? I mean, we're just not gonna get a proper answer that would help us to make good decisions. So we have adults with different varying degrees of mental abilities, and these don't always exist at birth too. Environmental factors like childhood abuse or poor nutrition, several things affect whether all adults of the same age or children, teenagers of the same age have the same mental capacity. Like there are people with mental illnesses that are physically fine, they were born mentally fine. What about drug users, drug addicts? So The considering a citizen of a country a person, that's a bit of a challenge. Like, what's the cutoff point between person and non-person? I think it's like when you're able to be logical and make good decisions, but what about someone who steals a lot or a drug addict? Like, we can't trust these people to have sound judgment. That's what it comes down to, like exercising good judgment.
Well, I wish I hadn't taken it this way because I don't even know how to fit that in into the last 3 minutes that we have here before the half-hour mark.
Personhood versus non-personhood. But because we have some living persons who I don't think they exhibit that degree of personhood. I think that theory of personhood is a totally different conversation, but it's an interesting concept.
Well, as an animal rights activist, I extend personhoods to all the other animals, including cows, pigs, chickens, insects, earthworm.
So I'm guessing if the nearest mosquito begins to bite you, you'll just let it feed, right?
Oh no, that's self-defense. That thing is gonna die.
That thing.
Yeah. No,
A mosquito is an animal.
Well.
Mm-hmm.
No, because I was gonna curse. I was gonna say that fucker, and so really no, I misspoke. That fucker is gonna die. So I'm not. I should actually thing was the more offensive term than fucker. So. I was just trying to not curse, but whatever. This is not for children, anyways. But so, I'm trying to get you on board with this idea.
Well,
Where are you leaning?
I would say that you have my support insofar as it is a topic worth discussing and it's a topic worth discussing thoroughly. I agree with the fact that things must be done in a democratic way. Like, we must take the opinions of different people in society, like the ones who had the experiences. We must really start the conversation and ensure that the arguments are well balanced and really hear from everyone before we make a decision. So I agree with the fact that it's a contentious topic, but the time is very right to start the decision and to ensure that everyone has a voice in the way forward for society, that no one's voice should be repressed in any way. Neither should anyone force a decision on others. And I mean, we can't come to a consensus until we hear from everyone. So I think that's the most important point in this idea, that we need to consider everyone's opinion to make a decision. So a lot of this idea is open-ended, saying that the final decision would depend on everyone's input.
Right. This is a very open-ended idea, but I think that might be the one thing that could really use. Well, it would definitely benefit from being clarified. Like, by saying democratic consensus, maybe it should have a clause saying by hearing from all the parties affected. Especially giving those who are like actually firsthand experiencing these circumstances, that we should really be considering what they're saying. Much more than those who have not been, or at least every one of us should actually listen to that. So, okay, I'm gonna try to fine-tune this idea, and then I'll see. Actually, maybe we can develop that together. Try to formulate a better version of this together off camera. All right, so that was the second half of our show. Fascinating stuff, as always. And again, to our viewers, if any of those ideas speak for you, please support them in the Agora so they can rise up, so more people can see them, and so more people can support them. Rosemarie, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and this was a great discussion, and I'm sure that persons watching would be stimulated to really think about the hard topics. You know, we discussed two very heavy ideas. Mine was short, but it was heavy in the sense that it addressed politics and the political climate in Grenada, which is something a lot of people shy away from discussing. And then your idea was on abortion, which is a worldwide hot topic. I mean, it makes or breaks certain politicians. So I'd like to say that this was a really good episode because we tackled some heavy issues.
That's the thing. I actually really want to add a quick comment that it's this idea. It's definitely not easy to express, and that's why that idea, that last idea, was so open-ended. Because and that's where I encourage other people to try to express their ideas. Well, anyways, that leads me to the rest of the conclusion. So thank you for those who joined us watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the show. But if these ideas that we discussed today do not represent you well enough, please go ahead and create your own ideas in the Agora. Tell others about those ideas. Come on this Egora Experience show to discuss your ideas with me, or best yet, start doing your own Egora Experience program. Thanks again, everyone, and see you in the Agora.